Okay, so welcome everybody who's listening. We're back at the show. I'm your host Christoph, and I have today again with me Peter Moon. Peter Moon is an author and many other things. And today we want to talk about his Romanian book series. So yeah, Peter, if you wanna dive right in or say something about yourself.
Okay, I'll begin. But first, tell me, is your audience mostly German or is it international? Mostly.
Definitely international. I think a lot of US people.
Okay. What percentage of your audience is German, if any?
I guess like maybe 20%.
Okay. Because it just occurred to me that my mother-in-law is, she grew up in Germany. She speaks German. She's also Romanian.
Okay.
And she went to school. One of her teachers was Hermann Oberth.
Mm-hmm.
He was a famous rocket scientist who taught Wernher von Braun. Very famous rocket scientist.
Who went from Germany then to the US to start NASA.
Yeah, exactly. And he was from the German part of Romania, in Sibiu. It's a very beautiful city. But so we're talking about, and there's a big connection between the Romanians and the Germans, which is only one of which is the word for yes in German, which is da. They also use da, and the German word for Germany or German, Deutsch, is very similar to the root word for their native Dacia, Deutsch Dacia. Very similar. D-A-C-I-A, Dacia, or Dacia.
Okay.
That's what Romania should be called, Dacia.
And that's like an ancient term of Romania.
Yeah, it goes back only a few hundred years. They deliberately changed the name to take the attention off of the connection between the Romanians and the Germans and the Goths. The Goth culture historically has disappeared. They don't know where the Goths came from. Historically. The Romanians know where they came from.
And what do they say?
Well, this was the ancient culture of Dacia that evolved into Gothic. They have in Romania, the ancient Celtic people, or the root of the Celtic people, were identified as the Gete. They call them the Gete, but that's phonetically the same as the Gote, Goth. So I don't know how you, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Would you speculate, because our most famous poet is named Goethe?
I was just thinking of that as you said that, yes. And how would you say, like in German, how would the Germans describe or pronounce the word Gothic or Goth, a Goth? How would they say that?
So we say Gotisch or Goten, die Goten.
Okay, that means like of God.
It means exactly, just with God we have two T. We say God with two T, and Goten, yeah, right, wow.
Yes, and this is a whole hidden history, and my mother-in-law would better explain it to you in German. I should introduce the two of you. And you could
so I could interview her in German. Mm-hmm.
Her children work for Bosch.
And in Germany?
I think Bosch in Timișoara, which is on the extreme western end of Romania, on the Hungarian border, not far from Austria.
I think I actually know people that have been born there.
Yes, so there are Germans in Romania, but more Hungarians perhaps, but the city of Sibiu. Now, so okay, so we will go into how I got involved with Romania. And my first association with Romania is through the time control scientist, Dr. David Anderson, who had met me and introduced himself to me just after returning from Romania in 1999. And
He was in Romania back then?
well, he visited Romania for the first time in 1999. He was invited. He was in Germany, as a matter of fact, and he was asked to replace a speaker at a conference in Romania, a conference called Atlanticron, which is has been going on since 1989. Its first, I guess what you would call official congregation or gathering was on the Danube in eastern Romania on an island near the small town of Capitava. And this was a fishing spot for people and for the person who helped found it, Sorin Rapanovich. And he went there as a kid, and it was his dream to have a big conference. As he became more influential in the government, he was able to facilitate a meeting where he would have, it was a science fiction camp originally, where they would sleep out and talk about science fiction, but it grew into a conference for writers, artists, and scientists. So Dr. David Anderson was in Germany. I think at that time he was working on a project called Dark Star. And Dark Star was where they were basically making something appear invisible to the naked eye. And this was done through manipulation of space-time, warping space-time.
Okay.
But,
And
yeah.
yeah, and you also said, I mean, Dr. David Anderson is a special person, not that I know from reading your books. And you said he's a time control scientist. So you have to
Yes.
elaborate a little bit on that, because it's quite mind-blowing actually what he does.
It is actually mind-blowing. I mean, I've been familiar with him and his terms for 21 years. But basically, when he was in the Air Force, the US Air Force, he was asked to create a space-time model for figuring out and preventing satellites from diverting their course in space. Every year, a satellite in space, because of its spin, its orbit, and gravitational pull and whatnot, will drift away a few meters. And so they wanted to figure out a way to stabilize these things. So he began to create a mathematical model of what happened. And he was using theories in relativity. He understood Einstein very well. And he began to figure out that what he was doing had the potential to slow time down or speed it up. And this is based upon a principle called time dilation. So like if you're, say, in orbit around the Earth, time is going to go at a certain rate. If you go in orbit out to the size of Pluto or further out, the further out you go, and if you're going around the whole galaxy, time is going to slow down. Now, while you're looking at your clock, it's going to look the same, but there will be a differential between the person looking on Earth and the person floating out light years and light years away. When you do this in practice, say the difference between time dilation in, say, Earth and the planet orbit of Jupiter or Pluto is not going to be that great. It's not going to be that great. However, there is a difference. It's a scientific difference. And it's this scientific difference that can be exploited. And you will find when you get into hard science, very hard science, and very exacting science, which Germans have a reputation for being very precise. When you get into infinitesimal anomalies that might work for pragmatic purposes, and you find a difference, these are differences that can be exploited, tapped into, and extrapolated upon. Extrapolated meaning to take a principle and to expand upon it. And extrapolation is an important word for anybody who's ever been a fan of science fiction, because the whole crux or essence of science fiction is to take known principles and to extrapolate upon them to create a drama that is stimulates the mind and is interesting and makes you consider possibilities that you wouldn't otherwise. Well, this is the same thing that real science does as well. If it's a question of how effective it can be. So basically, the fact that there's a difference in time is something that can be exploited or taken advantage of, and he saw this potential. And for those interested in understanding better how this works, they can go to my website, theTimeTravelEducationCenter.com, theTimeTravelEducationCenter.com, where you can sign up and get 7 free videos which explain the math and physics of time travel. In other words, they will demonstrate for you that time travel is within the bounds of ordinary mathematics and physics. Ordinary. And when I say ordinary, the only thing you need to understand is the Pythagorean theorem. And most people understand that. That's 8th grade level or even below mathematics. You don't need quantum science. You don't need complicated anything. So, and this is all a result of my collaboration with Dr. Anderson. But anyway, to get back how I ended up in Romania with Dr. Anderson, well, and to just finish the story, he took that information, shared it with the Air Force and says, this has the potential to really manipulate time. They were not interested. They didn't show any interest. So he decided to leave the Air Force and go out on his own and develop and expand this. As he signed up to leave, was all ready to leave, had all his stuff packed, they tried to make him stay. They saw potential in what he was doing, but it was too late as far as he was concerned. So he petitioned his senator from his native state, and he got out of the Air Force and he went into private business. And it would eventually became the Time Travel Research Center, which has now been changed into the Anderson Institute in terms of name, same activity. And he began to experiment with this, and he got to the point where he could slow time. When I met him, he said he could slow time down and speed it up in a self-contained field about the size of a soccer ball. And he actually was able to show me a video of this with about 20 other people in April of 2010. We had a gathering at Montauk, New York, and he showed this, and we saw it, and we saw a flower which would normally take 3 or 4 days to grow in 3 or 4 minutes.
Wow.
It was quite spectacular. That's the most I have actually seen of his time reactor, and that was an early version. That was an early prototype. He then explained in 2010 that he could put, it was big enough to where he could put human beings. He had worked out so many problems, and the time device was indeed working and very powerful. And there's been a whole lot of drama in his life, some of it interacting with me. But anyway, when I met him in 1999, he had just returned from this conference in Romania, which moved him very deeply. He would go back for several years. It took him till 2008. He always wanted me to come, and he invited me one year, but I didn't go. In 2008, he offered to bring me there, all expenses paid, which I did in 2008. and I've been going back every year since to this conference of writers and scientists. Now, while all of this was going on, a publisher in Romania had read my signature book, The Montauk Project Experiments in Time. Actually, he wasn't a publisher, he was an editor for a publisher. The publisher wanted him to read it to say, should I publish it? And he says, yes, you should. The publisher said, no, I don't want to publish it. So the editor left his job and published it himself and created his own publishing company that was initially based upon the Montauk Project. After the Montauk Project was released in the Romanian language, one of their, an intelligence officer in Romania's secret department, Department Zero, read the book and asked the publisher if he'd like to look at his manuscript for publication, which he did. And this has become a book that in the English language is called Transylvanian Sunrise. In Romanian, it translates to Death's Head Future. And Death's Head Future is a very awkward title in English.
Yes.
If you ask the Romanians about the title in Romanian, they will tell you it is an awkward title in Romanian. It was originally called The Enemy Within, and that was the title I was given. I told them I didn't like that title. The book, the title Transylvanian Sunrise, was a much more marketable title, and I did that. But because Transylvania plays big in the drama as it unfolds. But that book, which was translated into English before I ever read it, I did not have to translate it. It was a book about a chamber discovered beneath the Romanian Sphinx in the Bucegi Mountains of Romania, which is about 2 to 2.5 hours north of Bucharest by car. And it's in the mountains. It's a sphinx. It's a big stone edifice. If you look at it from a certain platform that they now have there, you will see the left profile of a sphinx. From the right side, it's not as clear. You will see the profile of what looks like a griffin. And a griffin is sort of a combination of a lion and a dragon. Now, beneath this, about 300 meters, is a chamber that they discovered. And the book is mostly about the drama surrounding discovering the chamber and opening the chamber. And it begins with the birth of an individual whose name is Cesar Brad, or as in America, they would say Caesar Brad. And maybe in German, you would say Kaiser Brad. I don't know how do you pronounce Caesar in German? How do they say it? If you're talking about Julius Caesar, how do you say it? How?
Caesar.
Caesar?
A set. Yeah, Caesar.
Okay. So in any case, he was born with a huge umbilical cord, a very thick umbilical cord and very long. It was so big that they couldn't sever it or cut it with a normal knife. So they had to literally saw it off. Now, Christoph, if you've studied Qigong with me, you know that the navel is a very important source of Qi and identified with Qi. This phenomena of him being born with this big umbilical cord is a testament to the fact that he had an extraordinary amount of Qi or life force within him. And because it was an anomalous birth, they reported it to the Securitate and the security force of Romania. And security brought in a Chinese doctor, Dr. Zhen, who was the head of the paranormal department in Romania. He had been a part of a cultural transfer between Red China and Romania. And Romania had an excellent education system. They would teach a certain number of Chinese and educate them. And in return, China would give them their expert in paranormal to develop a paranormal department for the Romanian intelligence service, which in the book is called Department Zero. It was highly secretive section. And Dr. Zen comes in to examine this young baby. And periodically he would come back now and then and eventually visit him as he was growing up and monitoring him. And they made an agreement with his parents, the Romanian security, that they would be paid a certain amount of money in communist Romania. They would be made more comfortable in exchange for letting them monitor the son, which didn't do any harm. In fact, this Dr. Zen was developing this man's, this young boy's psychic ability, which was already in abundance. But when he became a teenager, he was taken to different facilities where he was trained and his abilities were cultivated and refined. So this man, Cesar Brad, grows up to be involved in Department Zero, eventually becoming the head of Department Zero.
Peter, I have one question. Department Zero, it's not officially recognized, am I right?
No, it's not officially recognized. I once met a Romanian senator. He was a very well-placed person in the Romanian government, and I was having dinner. He wanted to meet me. And he was being told all about this stuff, not by me. But he said, when he met me, he says, I'm the president of a literary society in Romania. How come I've never heard of this book? I said, well, it's in Romanian. And the person who helped facilitate the introduction said, yeah, it's even in Peru. People have read it in Peru. So he was surprised that the book wasn't known by him. He says, but this project could not have happened because I would have had to have signed off on the budget, because he was involved in the budgetary process at one point. And I said, that's because it wasn't financed by the Romanian government. And the book details how it was financed through a company in Uruguay in South America, which was by a Romanian general who was involved in, I guess what you call financial markets. So it was funded independently by a member of the Romanian government during communist Romania. So in any case, the only people that knew about it, I think, was the head of security, of the normal security, the Romanian president, and the people directly involved with it, which was not very many. And so anyway, when he was the head of Department Zero, he was approached by an Italian Freemason, a man named Signor Massini. And Signor Massini is a very well-educated Freemason who claimed to be a member of the Bilderberger group. And he is dressed impeccably. He speaks Romanian, which is not common for Italians. Romanians can understand Italian, but not vice versa. I mean, there are some commonalities, but most Italians don't speak Romanian. They can kind of get by, but not really. So he was very impressed that he spoke Romanian, but this was not a good person. However, he went to Department Zero, and Cesar was just very surprised. He says, how does he even know that Department Zero exists or that I exist? He was very impressed by that. Not necessarily impressed in a good way, but how come this man knows who I am? And what he tells Cesar is that there is the Pentagon in the United States has detected an anomalous area beneath this area of the Sphinx, and they can't determine what's inside of it. It defies their highly sophisticated ground penetrating radar, which is connected to satellites. And I found this very interesting because the satellites technology of the United States was at that point contracted out to Dr. David Anderson because his technology was used to stabilize satellites in outer space.
And that brings me to one.
What?
No, I was just thinking about strange attractions or strange attractor. You write about it in Ong's Head, I think. And this
Yes,
reminds
yes,
me, if you
it's
can
been
speak to
written
that.
about by many people, but yes, strange attractors. Yes, go ahead.
No, just if you can explain it to people, what does it mean? Because for me, exactly even now, this how it relates to David Anderson and the satellite and the story in Romania, like how it all comes together.
Well, it's mysterious. A strange attractor. I mean, there's the law of like attracts like. That's part of quantum physics. Like attracts like. That's very common. But it's so. In other words, when this is funny. When I was in Bulgaria, I've been surrounded by Bulgarians my entire trip, and I had two Bulgarian friends that spoke English, but I was very dependent upon them. And we were at a rock place. It's a very famous place in Romania where there's this horseman coming out of the rocks. Nobody knows who built it or how it got there. And there's a big area. And they had gone off in their own direction. And I was by myself. We would meet up. And so I was by myself and I climbed up to this area overlooking this place. And I saw a couple. And when they saw me, this is the law of attraction we're talking about, the law of affinity. They were German. They were not American. They were not English. And they were so relieved to see me, like I was their long lost brother, because I don't really speak German at all, but they spoke English. And they were so relieved to see a person they could talk to, because they did not speak Bulgarian. And that was a real brotherhood I felt with German people at that time, because not many Germans can speak English, and they certainly could. So they were like very relieved to see somebody they could talk to and relate to culturally, even though American and German cultures are so different. There was much more commonality than there was with the Bulgarian culture. So
yeah.
when you reach across and you find this in a foreign country, that you will gravitate to what you can relate to and who can speak to you. And even bad English for an American is like an oasis compared to people that don't speak it at all or don't understand you. So that is a very practical example. And you'll also appreciate that from having attended Qi Gong class in Brooklyn with me. But one time I went to the indoor class, and there was this, and most of the students are Black. So I saw this one woman was in there, and I walked in there and I knew I'd seen her before, but she's looking at me and she's smiling at me and she's just so into me. And I'm saying, why is she looking at me like this? Why is she looking at me like this? And then after a while, I realized, because I was only the only other white person in the room. And this was a big deal to her because she was very uncomfortable sociologically, just because she wasn't used to being around a room full of Black people in a primarily Black neighborhood. So I made her feel comfortable just by the fact that I was, one of her kind. And that's like, now to make it to when we talk about the book Ong's Hat and Strange Attractors, we're going from the sociological or social interfacing to a whole nother level of quantum phenomena, whereby they call them strange attractors. So if you're contemplating, and they would talk about in that book about contemplating where a particle becomes a wave, particle wave duality it's called, or where a particle becomes a wave or a wave becomes a particle, that is where, like, we are in a collapsed wave. The physical plane that's all dense is like a wave of energy, like a wave of energy moves. Like, say, if you're thinking of a TV signal, it goes up and down, a wave. It looks like a wave on an oscilloscope, up and down sine wave. It's called boom, 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 boom. And it's moving from point A to point B. A collapsed wave is like when the wave stops and it's no longer traveling. We're stuck here. were like a stuck picture in a film projector. So you could say that living in 3D reality is a collapsed wave because we're all stuck here on a planet Earth that is still like a stage. The only difference is we're relative to it. We can move around and have bodies and have a theater experience. So we're living in a collapsed wave. When we have a strange attractor, as is put in the book and as you pointed out, you're having a association between two waves of energy, whereby it's not necessarily of the stage you're on, it's from another stage or another collapsed wave somewhere. And that's one way to explain a strange attractor. So when we bring it back to Dr. Anderson, who has no known ties to Romania. No, I mean, I shouldn't say to Romania. He has known ties to Romania, no known ties to Department Zero.
Mm-hmm.
And he brings me to Romania, and he's working with these satellites. These are, you know, it's like it's like cousins who don't know each other or haven't met. They're acting in concert with their genetics and doing things that interrelate in a family sort of way, but they're not aware of each other, or apparently not aware of each other. So this is a strange attractor that, you know, that we were discussing with regards to the satellite, that they had discovered that there was a chamber beneath the Sphinx through the satellite of the Pentagon. Now, this was the people that were in charge of this information at the Pentagon were connected to Freemasonry, as was this Italian Freemason. And it was through this connection that they wanted to know what was there. But to get at it, they went to the head of Department Zero instead of going through the Romanian government, which was also rather odd. Like, how did they know about Department Zero and why did they go to Department Zero? So basically, the American, and here was this Italian Freemason acting as a spokesman for America, which was very weird. And not only for America, but for the Pentagon. So they were, it was arranged whereby the American government or the Army would come in and use high-powered laser technology to open this chamber. And it was very difficult because they had to dig deep into a mountain. They had to keep things rather hush-hush, quiet. And a lot of the book concerns all that drama. And eventually they were able, and there were deaths involved. There was an energy barrier that they found. And it turned out that Caesar was the only one who could open the energy barrier because there was a security device that had a handprint. And they found out when they put his hand on it, it would open. So it was almost like, here's another strange attractor. It was destiny for him to be born into this.
Mm.
And so they are eventually able to open, which goes into a tunnel where there's a sort of a dim light, which has a very pleasant feeling to it. And then you go into eventually getting to a chamber where there were huge tables. It was technology 50,000 years old, they assumed it to be at the time, which was more modern than ancient. And it had tables whereby if you put your hand over a certain section of the table, like a square part of it, it would read out your DNA. If you put your hand closer to the surface of the table, it would read it out more microscopically, going down to the molecular and atomic levels. There were other tables where if you put your hand over the table, it would show holographically a star system and a planet and an animal, where this species of an animal, and would show you the planet and the star that it came from. If you put your hand over another part of the table, it would show you a different animal, a different planet, and a different star system. And At the same time, if you had your hand over the other one, it would show a hybridization of the two life forms and what that would look like. So this was a genetic, it had all potential genetic permutations that were conceivable. It's a much more advanced concept than Noah's Ark in the Bible, where you have a preservation of DNA for the posterity of the earth after the flood, after the great flood. So here was a device that was more ancient than modern, more modern in style than ancient, but it was just an incredible device. Now, as you went into a part of this tunnel called the projection hall, it would have a holographic device which you could see the history of the world. And the history of the world would be different because it was bioresonant. So what you would see as the history of the world might be different than what I would see. There would be commonalities, but because you come from a German background, you might see things that were a little more tied to your genetic experience that had to do with Germany and the ancestors and me the same. At some point, there would be a commonality. Or it might just be specific interests or specific things that could be cross DNA. Like my sister did one of those DNA tests and said we had like a very tiny percentage of some from Siberian tribe somewhere. So, it might get a cross current of the history of Siberia, but you would see this tailor-made for you history of the world. It cut off in about 400 AD. They didn't know why at that time. Now there were 3 tunnels in that projection hall. And each one of these 3 tunnels have become the subjects of further books because we now have 7 books in the series, having just produced the 7th book in the series, The Etheric Crystal. People interested in reading about these books can go to skybooksusa.com where they can order the books. The books are also available on Amazon, on Kindle, and whatnot. So this is sort of this incredible story of the first book, and it's all about the drama, the politics of opening this chamber, and then exploring it. At the time that book was written, the book had been explored for about the chamber had been explored for about 6 weeks. And the author who writes about it is Radu Sinomar. He is he was handpicked by Caesar Brad to visit the chamber and write about it. And he has become more and more involved in the whole Department Zero. So he becomes more of the primary character than Caesar Brad, who is the main character in the first book. In the second book, the Chinese doctor, who kind of plays a very low profile in the first book, he appears in the second book, Transylvania Moonrise. And the second book begins with a series of articles in the Romanian press that are translated into English in this book, which actually corroborate the circumstances and story that are in the book 1. And it's very interesting. So then the first chapter is that Radu's publisher is contacted by a mysterious man who wants to meet with Radu Sinomar, and Radu Sinomar has instructions with the publisher. I'm not here to meet with the public. This is not something I want to do. But the man is so persistent and so good at being persistent that the publisher says, "What do you want to meet him for?" Because he doesn't do this. He says, "It's a Lama that wants to meet him. I'm representing a Tibetan Lama who wants to meet him." So he relays that to Radu, who says he's interested in meeting the Lama. And that's how, and that becomes the story of the first chapter of that book. And it turns out that when Radu the person who is making the contact for the Lama is an alchemist. So the first chapter, we are treated with a lecture on alchemy that is like nothing you will ever see or hear of in typical alchemical texts. because this is obviously a real alchemist who has discovered many secrets of life, and he's very evolved. And then at the end of that chapter, the Lama arrives, and the Lama arrives with a very strange creature known as a Yidam. It's about 7 feet high, humanoid, does not speak. I think he can, he speaks very gutturally. And he is what is known as a Yidam is a creation of a Lama when he reaches a certain stage of development. And when he needs to go into realms that he can no longer go into physically because it would kill his flesh body, he develops what's called a Yidam, which is a different body that can facilitate going into different realms. And a Yidam does not have to be a humanoid creature like this one is. It could be like a fairy. It could be like a koala bear. It could be like anything that the Lama wants to make it. But this particular one is a very advanced one. And he brings this Yidam. And it turns out he reveals himself at the end of the chapter as being the same character as Dr. Zen. He was a Tibetan Lama who escaped China in the 50s when the Dalai Lama was being herded out of China herded out of Tibet by the Chinese. And he somehow ingratiated himself with the Chinese and became a recognized doctor in China, even though he was really a Tibetan Lama. And he had friends in strange places in the world. He's a supernatural character in his own right. But so that's a very intriguing story. And then he brings him the Yidam because the Yidam's going to take him on a journey, accompanying them on a journey to Tibet. And he wants Radu, the author, not to be surprised when he comes. He wants to get him acclimated to him. And then they go into a whole nother discussion. So that becomes a whole nother adventure in what is as they say, is now a series of 7 books.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, it's so rich, the story. I just wanted to clarify. So you have actually met the publisher, the Romanian publisher.
That's correct. And he has verified for me that this character, Eleanor, who is the man who, it's a pseudonym, Eleanor contacts on behalf of the on behalf of the Lama. He is a real character with a real voice, but he's never met Eleanor. And when
They talked on the phone, or
he talked on the phone with him.
With the alchemist, basically. Eleanor
talked with the alchemist, yes. He never talked with the Lama. When I told him years later that the alchemist was supposed to meet me and come to my house, he was shocked. He was shocked. But the alchemist did not come to my house. And that was because of me. I was not ready to see him. And I might be ready to see him next year. But I just was not ready. So my law of attraction was not out for him. And that's a very much of an internal thing. It has to do with me. Whether whether I should have been ready or not is beside the point. I will be ready soon. Whether he's ready or not is another question.
Yeah, I mean, actually, I have to say, I would also like to accompany you to Romania at one point, because it seems like this grand adventure that's, combining different realms, like real life and the mythical and the mysterious and this whole book series.
Well, it is very much an amazing life story because I didn't go to Romania by reason of these books, at least apparently. I thought that David Anderson, who brought me to Romania, and the books were more connected than they were. Because when he first invited me to come, he called me on the phone and says, "What would you like to do when you're in Romania? We're going to give you 3 days trip. We'll pay for the trip for 3 days just to get you acculturated with the country, a cultural tour." And I said, "Well, I want to visit this mysterious Hall of Records." he contacted all of his contacts in the government, which were extensive, and they sent him back to the publisher. So what I did receive when I was there on my first trip was a CD from Radu Sinamar, which he gave me an audio CD and told me some things about it, none of which was very confidential at the time. Now it's so much of it's in the rest of the books. It had to do with who built it, and it seemed to be a very alien-esque presence. But at the same time, when I went to Atlanticron, I was taught by professors and metaphysical people there, esoteric people, to go to if you want to understand Romania, they said, you must go to Sarmisegetuza, the spiritual capital of the ancient Dacs or Dacians. And this is where you will understand the heart of Romania. And you must go there if you want to understand it. So the second year I went back, where I actually listened to David's lectures on time travel. He lectured extensively on time travel theory. And it was these lectures I was able to break down 6 years later and put them into the tapes you have now. It took me a long time to really grasp and put them in simple language. And he was very pleased with my ability to put them in simple language, because he said nobody had the time or patience to do that before. So, but when I went back and saw him in Romania for the second time, one of his friends took me to the spiritual capital, and it was a whole adventure. I mean, driving in trains overnight. So I began to have my old adventure into Sarmisegetuza, and I was told you must spend 3 days there, but we didn't have time to spend 3 days there. So, but it changed my life, because I went back. It took me 3 years to go back again. And when I was actually able to spend 3 days there, at that very location, I met a woman who would become my wife. And she's my wife now for 6 years. And this is like, it was a complete remarkable change. And as much as she's my wife, she's just a part of the story. She's not the central focus part. She has a family. As they say, her mother is German, stepmother is German, and teaches a spiritual school in Transylvania. And that's a whole annex to what I do. I'm not part of the school. I'm a friend of the school, but I do my own discipline. So I interact with them. And I've also was brought by one of their archaeologists to a cave, the Chocolatina cave in Transylvania, where when I had my conversation with David Anderson, it was a podcast we did. He told me that I said, what can you tell me about Romania? He said, there's a cave called Chocolatina Cave, which is where the biggest phenomena of time discharge has ever taken place on this planet. And I said, well, I was at that cave last summer, David. He was shocked. He was shocked. What am I doing at the cave? And so now I've gone to, I went to that cave 4 times. The fourth time in 2019. Now, there is a tradition, which I haven't talked about in Romania, but that the people, the spirits of the underground are called the Sulimanari, and they will appear to you as a shepherd, a beggar, or a sheep, and they will bring you to a cave. And if you go to the cave and meditate, you will be allowed entrance to the cave. That entrance might be metaphysical entrance, or it might be a physical entrance. Well, I went to Chocolatina Cave. I was brought there. When David told me the significance of it, I returned the following opportunity I could take. And I returned with some friends. We discovered another entrance to the cave. Then I went back the following year, and I discovered a camp near the cave. And then after I left that camp, 2 weeks later, a Romanian friend of mine went to the camp and said, oh, they said there was an American here, but they didn't remember his name. It was me. He said, oh, that must be Peter Moon. And yeah, so I arranged to go back and stay at the camp last year. and I was invited to enter the cave. I went a mile into the cave, and I went very close, I believe close based upon the scientific reports where this time discharge occurred. They call it the Bivouac Room. And the bivouac is a military term for camping out, or where you would camp out. And this was a region in the cave, the biggest region I saw where you might be able to camp out. And this time discharge occurred in a alcove or a room adjacent off of that. I didn't know that at the time, or I would have checked out all the little closets, so to speak, cave closets. And it was an adventure of a lifetime. Now, after I emerged from the cave, I was in there for 5 hours in a wetsuit with a helmet and boots because it's full of water and bats. And when I emerged from the cave, I was talking to a man who had been into the cave. He was very impressed because he said it's a very strenuous journey. And I was actually sick at the time. So I went in, I was just recovering from a rather nasty illness. And I had a message to put a ham radio antenna there at the camp. This was a message from the cave that I got. And I've now raised the funds for the antenna, and I got 4 people to contribute to it. And I said I would give them a journey to the cave. I can't promise they'll get in the cave because I don't have the authority to bring people into the cave. If it can be facilitated, we will, but we'll go to the cave and we'll have an experience. That'll hopefully be next summer if the COVID crisis wanes. Because I didn't go last summer. I was going to do the trip last summer. And I can't really wait till, I have to wait till the COVID crisis before I can get the right Romanians to put up the antenna.
What would it do, the antenna? What would it?
Just a ham radio. It's setting up a communication center. Because when we got to the cave, when we got to the camp, we had actually taken a digression. There was a fork in the road, and we had a van with 9 people in it. Mostly Americans, but there were 2 Romanians. And we hit the fork in the road, and somebody says, "Which way do we go?" I said, "Well, the cave's down that way, but let's go up this road and see where it goes," in a spirit of free adventure. So we went up. It got so steep that we decided we better turn around. Then, well, we turned around, we saw these kids coming up a ravine. They were hiking with backpacks. And when they came, we talked to them, and they said, "Oh, you must go up to the camp. The man there knows everything about this area." So we said, "Oh, there's a camp." So we followed them. It was only a short distance. We were almost at the camp. We went into the camp, and there's, just it's a cabin, there's houses. They sleep in a big room with lots of different beds, and there's a couple of those rooms. And it had a toilet, a modern toilet. It was a shower. It was comfortable. It was like camping. It was rustic, but it was still far better than what I experienced at Atlanticron. But in terms of creature comforts, and the man, started bringing us wine and cakes and stuff. He was hospitality, and he had a big sign. He says, it said "Open Chocolatina." And I said, "Why does your sign in English? It says "Open" in English." He did not speak English well, but he spoke English. And he said, "I don't know. I just made it in English." He says, "You're the first to come." And everybody in the group loved him, but I was the only one to go back. There was a lot of what you call social human problems with the rest of the group. Mm-hmm. Not with me, but amongst each other. And best friends sort of disconnected from each other. And all it does is amount to a huge distraction. And one of my dearest friends, as a result, did not go back. He'd been with me 3 or 4 times, 3 times, I think, and to the cave twice. And it was fortunate under these circumstances that he was not there, because there was only one wetsuit for the size of us. In other words, if we were together, I wouldn't have gone in the cave because, we're both about 6'2". So if they had one wetsuit for our size, I would have said, you take it. You're more interested in going in the cave than I am. And I would have used my illness to not do it. And because I didn't really want to go, but I would not refuse the invitation because this was a chance of a lifetime. And I was very tired, very exhausted, but I didn't, as my friend who was with me said, he said, it looked like at one point, my spirit just overcame my body. Because after we went in a few hundred yards, there was this huge, like a cliff inside the cave. And there was a ladder. There was 2 ladders, and you had to climb up the ladder to get to the upper part of the cave. And I said, boy, that looks dangerous. It looks risky. And I'm not feeling good. I don't want to go up that ladder. I said, this is good. I've seen enough. And they all said, no, we must go on. You must go on. So the guy who took me he already foresaw this, and he put a harness and a pulley on me so I couldn't fall off. And I climbed up the ladder. I didn't need it, as it turned out, but I had that security guard, and then he escorted me through this very narrow opening instead of climbing over the rock so I could get up. And we went, and it was like circumstances and time were met to make me go in that cave and have that experience. And as they say, it was the experience of a lifetime. I went in there with 3 other people, and it was incredible. So I look forward.
What did you feel on an energetical level, or what was happening in your mind?
I was so intent on, a lot of the times you're walking through water and you're having to hold onto the side of the cave. And I'd like to think I had gloves on. I don't even remember if I had gloves on. I brought a infrared movie camera, but I kept it in the backpack of our leader the whole time because I was too tired to take photographs or pictures. I was just too tired. My friend took some shots, which I put in my e-newsletter and stuff, but I was too exhausted. And then the water is very pure, but I wish I had a cup, because when you got tired and you wanted water, you'd have to reach down with your hands and cup the water and drink it, which was cold. And you'd have to empty your boots every so often because the boots would fill with water, and you just kind of like lift your foot up so the water drains out of the boots. Keep in mind, it's 55 Fahrenheit degrees in the cave at all times. And you're walking, so I was never cold. It was, and the wetness of the feet or the water in the cave was not an issue. The wetness would be an issue, but not the coldness. So I was struggling to survive or just to be there rather than to feel too much energy. When the bats would come by, it was kind of fun. They were kind of like, wow, there's life in the cave. And you just experienced, there were 2 points where we stopped and rested and meditated. And then we meditated and those were just deep moments that is just, what were you thinking? I don't know. You're with your friends, and with the friends I'm with, you create a bond with them, particularly the 2 that lived in Bucharest that I came up with. A young girl and my friend who's a psychiatrist. You kind of form an eternal bond with these people. And then of course the guy who's leading us, who's a native to the area, I might be one of many people he's taken or tolerated, but I'm unique to him, because when he first started talking to us the first time we met him, he started talking about the Philadelphia experiment. Oh. And then all of a sudden he couldn't remember the name of it. He says, Philadelphia. And then they all start pointing at me. So I had to then explain who I was and what I was doing there. And he got an earful. So when I came back to the camp, he asked me to lecture the next morning because he had a bunch of scouts there. It was a scouting camp. So keep in mind, I'm the only American there, the only one a native English speaker. And when I had all the other Americans with me, they didn't get to come in. They weren't allowed entrance into the cave. It was only for me, as it turned out. And I felt very gifted and very honored. And I want to get David to come to the cave because he's never been there. When he found out I'd been to the cave, he wanted to know how far it was from Sarmasejatuza. And I was also taking a hike. It's everything. There's a big valley there, which is called the Valley of the Golden Thrones. And everything's pretty close, within 5 or 7 miles of each other. There's a lot of neat things in that valley. And my mother-in-law is now teaching transformational courses in there, in her School of Wisdom, that she's going to the valley. She has not been to Choc, even though she's sort of the heart of that area in terms of spiritual transformation. And she knows that area very well. She's never been to Chocolatina. She's never been to that area. Wow. So I've certainly told her about it. I would like to bring her there and have her experience it because it's a very incredible area.
Hmm. And what is the time discharge?
Okay, when you get 2 areas of basically a time reactor, David Anderson has called his device a time reactor. Now, what that means is the time reactor is distorting space-time. The Earth in itself can be considered a time reactor because Earth has a gravitational field, but that gravitational field is what generates the Earth in and of itself. It's not like the Earth was there and has a gravitational field. There is a gravitational field which creates a mass. It's related to, what is the term for it in physics? I can't remember it, but it's what forms a star. There's a term for it. And this is a gravitational force that is making things move around. But when things rotate, they're distorting space and time. And the video goes into this. It shows how rotation is the key. So it's like the wheel of life. That's even where the word tarot comes from. It's rota. Tarot and rota is an anagram, and it's the wheel. Tarot represents the wheel of life, which can also be construed as DNA. But so when you have this rotation of a field, it distorts space and time. So space and time, the Earth is twisting space and time, and you have to visual it like a vacuum cleaner. When you suck something, like if you were to suck a garment into a vacuum cleaner, the garment would twist. It would twist as it went in. Mm-hmm. And that's what happens when the Earth moves around in a rotation. It twists time and space, although it twists it rather, as they say, microscopically, because it's doing it, but it's actually twisting time and space. When you get 2 areas that are twisting time and space, you will have a discharge. So when he created a time reactor that was discharged, that was changing time and space, and it was juxtaposed with another piece of phenomena like the Earth, he found out that he was getting more power into the time reactor than he was putting in. Whatever electrical input he was giving it to make it run, he was getting more out. So this is a discharge of space-time, what he calls space-time motive force. And it can also be harnessed and used to solve the world's electricity problems. Unfortunately, the governments of the world are kind of deaf. It's like trying to talk to Democrats about the election being false, or trying to talk to Republicans about the election being honest. It's not going to work. This is the type of barrier that people have to space and time technology. They'll be interested, much like a kid would be interested, but when it comes to really doing it, the authorities, it's verboten.
Yeah, I just had like a realization right now. So we were doing Qigong, we were doing circle walking around 4 trees, and it was like 3 of us. So we were all kind of like rotating in figure 8s and like, but in around several trees, like 4 trees, and it was 3 of us. So would you say then each of us was like twisting like time and space? Because actually we did this for 15 minutes and I went out, and then Jadia, our teacher or my teacher, told me to come back in. And it was the first time I really felt like an enormous amount of energy, it was like an invisible river of energy. It was not like, oh, I think I might feel something. It was actually like very, plastic, the feeling of energy.
I'm very glad you said that, because Christoph is talking about a technique, and that is a modification of what we'll call the simplistic aspect of the technique, which is called circle walking. And I will be demonstrating this in my upcoming Qigong class, which is not online yet. But when you're circle walking, in typical Chinese Qigong, they teach circle walking incorrectly. They teach much of Qigong incorrectly, accidentally on purpose, to depower you, or so that you don't have the power they have. And circle walking is typically walking in a circle. You don't want to do that. You want to walk in a figure 8. That's proper circle walking. Now, this relates to the time-space phenomenon. I'll get to that in a second. But when you walk in a figure 8, you are torquing, as you move around each one of those curves, your knees, your elbows, your shoulders, your hips are torquing, means twisting in a way that is natural for the human body. When athletes, especially football players, get hurt, American football players, not soccer players, when they get, but it could apply to them as well. When they get hurt, it's because their body torques in the wrong way. If they were doing circle walking every day, they're probably not going to have those horrible injuries they have. They would reduce significantly, because you're not going to find yourself in those positions. Your body is going to be in the habit of torquing properly and not even getting into a position where it's going to be compromised, so that it torques in a way that it injures itself. So that's a very pragmatic way of moving your body in a river stream that's normal and conducive to the body. The other thing the circle walking does is it works your lymph nodes, which are your under your armpits, your knees, and your groin. And it makes the lymph flow. It also circulates your blood, spins the blood around the arterial walls, which prevents hardening of the arteries. It makes your blood flow good, in addition to whatever cardio workout it gives you. So it's a very good exercise just from a physical standpoint and cultivating life energy or Qi. But when we get to the time phenomena, it's this figure 8. You will see it in ancient illustrations of what's called an Ouroboros, or a snake eating its tail. Now, the snake eating its tail, or Ouroboros, is depicted either as a figure 8 or as a circle. And this is, in space-time phenomena, from what I learned from David Anderson, it's also a term from physics called a closed time-like curve. And a closed time-like curve is basically what's called a world line that is a circle. It has a beginning point and an end point, but it meets. Now, this is related to Albert Einstein's theory of general relativity, where he talks about if you were to draw a line in space and draw a straight line in space, just going like with a ruler that extended straight, it would eventually curve back on itself and come back to itself. That's a scientific reference point from Einstein. Now, this is the nature of time. So life is a closed time-like curve on a bigger scale. And there are multiple closed time-like curves. There are multiple loops of time, multiple experiences, but it's all about alpha and omega. There's a time travel movie called The Time Travelers from about 1963, which is probably readily available, and it shows how this phenomena in terms of experiences, the beginning is the end. This is also in the Bible where Christ says, I am Alpha and Omega, suggesting that he's on a timeline that has a beginning and an end, that is not necessarily the collapsed wave we experience in this world. But when you move in that circle of infinity, you are mimicking infinity and tying your mind to infinity. And as you may remember, that our teacher used to say, the human mind is timeless, formless, and infinite in its nature. So when you walk in that circle 8, and you're connecting to the infinity, the eyes are the pattern of infinity, the human breasts are the pattern of infinity, and the infinity is hardwired into the human body. So this is the law of attraction, or even strange attractors, but which become not so strange. Now, I'm doubly glad you mentioned this, because I was just sharing with you before the podcast about the importance of stretching. Now, when I was in Qigong for about 5 or 6 months, I was doing an exercise somewhat similar to what you were talking about with the trees, only we would do it around chairs. The teacher would put chairs in the room, and we would all go in and out of the chairs, moving around in figure 8s or just circles. And it was torquing my waist, body. And I found out that when I was playing touch football, which is my favorite hobby, I was now able to move. I was like, I must have been 54 years old, and I was now able to move like when I was 30. I could move around guys. I was very fast, as composed to being respectably fast for an aged person. I got to the point where I was really fast, and I was so enthralled with my progress, I ran too fast, and I completely I collapsed physically. I couldn't walk hardly. And I was later taught by one of my fellow students, he says, you don't exceed 80% of your capacity in Qigong. You don't. If it's a new ability, you don't go 100%. And I was going 110%. And I didn't know that. I've not been able to regain that speed ever since, because I violated important law. I exceeded my capacity. But only recently have I discovered here it is over 13 years later, and I'm saying, well, this is what I should have been doing. What the teacher said was to stretch after each exercise, to do these towel stretches, because when you stretch after running, your blood vessels are like pumping, and the blood vessels are like, or the blood is all moving through the body. When you stretch, it now helps the fascia and the muscles grow. So it's going to make you a better, faster runner. If a top sprinter or top American football player were to stretch after every game or endeavor, he's going to get even better. And they don't think you can. And the proof will be if they do it. But so when you say this was an exercise that profoundly changed my life at the time, but I lost the ability. Now here it is 13 years later. I'm now no longer 54. I'm 67, about to turn 68, and I'm still going to go for it because I've had tremendous, I guess what you'd say, resurgence from doing this. So the important thing here, and the only reason I got into Qigong was because of my studies in time travel. And it was the Montauk medicine man who introduced me to Qigong and my Qigong teacher. So this was, it's all related. These are strange attractors that become less strange as you begin to understand them.
Okay.
A long answer to an interesting question.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we at one other point, we should also talk more about the whole Qigong, because it was actually what stuck out to me in your books, you know, when you were talking about Roosevelt, your Qigong teacher, and I was like, what the fuck, I have to meet this guy at one point in my life. Because it felt so different and on such a high level that you were just like describing it. But then actually experiencing it is a completely different level that you cannot even imagine beforehand. And you cannot imagine how it feels and how well it does. It does to your body and to your mind to do it.
Yes, and you were so sharp to pick up on it because you came all the way from Germany to Brooklyn to study. And this was a remarkable thing because I remember one guy came from Detroit to the class. He'd come in sometimes all the way from Detroit to study for a weekend seminar. And you could resonate with what I wrote. But those people are few and far between. However, I'm going to be doing these classes online because I know that I can package the information and reach people, and it will be like, say, for example, when I started studying in May 1st of 2007. That was a year before I went to Romania. And after a couple months, his assistant told me, she says, it's really good in the beginning if you come. No, I remember I was going on vacation. So I said, I'm going to go to all the classes I can. There was a special offer. You could come and study, come to all the classes you want if you paid more money. So I said, I'm gonna really do a lot of classes in July because I'm not going to be here in August. So I started coming, and she says, it's really good that you're doing this because in the beginning you need to learn as much as you can. After a few months, he would get phone calls from the medicine man, or the Montauk medicine man, because he would teach him over the phone. The medicine man would live far away, and he could only talk over the phone. He'd seldom with me. And he says, you got to talk to Peter Moon, he says. He's been coming to the classes. He knows a lot. In other words, I could teach my teacher now. Medicine man was my teacher. I could teach my teacher after going to so many classes. And then I went to Germany in the end of October. I was there for Halloween in 2007 in Bavaria, in March Reagan. And because when I wasn't talking, the lectures were all in German. And although they provided a translator, it's not so fun listening to a translator. I don't know if I wanted to listen to the lectures anyway. So I told everybody when I said, I will be in the beer garden at such and such a time. If anybody has any physical problems, you bring them to me and I will help you with them with Qigong. And people came, and there was not one problem I could not help them with. And it is such a pleasure to teach, to interact with Germans or Europeans, because they don't have this American mind that is resistive to learning. I can't explain it. It goes back to my time in Scientology, where Europeans were very direct. And I would also share this with you. And I I think the Romanians are even more pure in their essence than the rest of Europe because they are more undisturbed as a culture from the West or the Western mindset, which I'd say the epitome of the Western mindset in a degradation style is French bread and French cuisine. That is not healthy. It's not that it's not tasty, but it's like you're developing the frontal lobes to the point where you're more interested in delicacy than in survival. And the Romanians were always fighting off hordes of barbarians. So they didn't have time to develop French bread. They had to develop survival. So they haven't lost their primordial aspects, which is a big teaching of Qi Gong. So when I interface, they listen to you directly and they listen to what you say without prejudice. Whereas when I married my wife and she's a young woman, I felt like there was a distinct difference because when I was making love to her, there was no Burger King, McDonald's, or Kentucky Fried Chicken in her aura. And I say that sarcastically, but I say it with truth. She was like, there wasn't all this stuff there that any American woman would be subject to unless she's really doing a lot of spiritual practice just by living around it, you know? And then if she's eating it, she's got that Burger King from the Burger King commercial, you know, sitting there looking over her shoulder. And as I said, I'm being sarcastic, but the European mind is much easier to communicate and educate than the American mind. Because America has many positive things, and my wife has experienced them, but it also has so many things that are undesirable. So all cultures have a positive and a negative to them. But the fact that you could appreciate this and come all the way to America and learn what you've learned, it's good to connect with you again. And I hope we can connect in Romania someday. I hope you can come to the cave.
Yeah, it would be great, yeah. Or meet someone from underground.
Yes, well, maybe that will happen, and maybe get you in touch with my German mother-in-law, or half German. She's really Romanian, but she grew up in very interesting lady. She grew up part of her time in Germany.
Okay, yeah, definitely. I mean, you can
speak German and have fun, and her kids speak German.
Yeah, that would be great. Yeah, I mean, so Peter, I think for brevity's sake, I mean, there are so many ways we could still go, like from the whole saga, but maybe we should just do like another, like a follow-up.
We can do a follow-up. Yep.
To just, because there's still, I would like to talk about like symbols and like ancient genetic modification and all of these things. But yeah, I think it needs its own time for people to digest it.
Well, as I say, they can go to skybooks.usa.com to investigate the books. They can go to timetraveleducationcenter.com to look at the videos on the math and physics of time travel that show you that it's easily within the bounds of ordinary math and physics.
Yeah, and I would even tell people to look at it like a couple of times to really understand it.
It takes a while, even though it's very simple. And David said when he would present this to a university, it was very hard for people to catch on, and he said the young people would catch on first, and then they would all get it, or get it to whatever extent. They didn't get it to the point where you see them writing about it or experimenting with it.
But do you know if someone like took it up and worked with it?
I get very little feedback on it. Because first off, most people who read it or watch it are, they're readers. I want to say middle class. I don't know that they're middle class, but they're doing their life. Who has time for time travel? You can appreciate it intellectually. And even myself, who has a life invested in it, it's my work. I write about it. I make a living off of it. There are three factors here, and I call it the psychology of space-time, which I've done one video series on, the psychology of space-time. There are three factors. One is dimension, which is the psychology of dimension, which is a quantitative analysis of dimension as opposed to a qualitative analysis. There is a factor of power and people's inability to deal with the power issues surrounding such a technology. And that goes hand in hand with the third issue, which is censorship. So you're censored because you're not allowed, its access denied. So now you're studying the whole history of secrecy, and power is secrecy, censorship is power. So these are issues that are perhaps equally important to the subject itself. What are we not allowed to see? What are we not allowed, and why are we not allowed? And sometimes when you are allowed to see something, you're not allowed to share the secret for whatever reason. And perhaps it's just not wise to share the secret. It's like putting a gun in a child's hand. They might misuse it through accident, stupidity, or bad morals. So this is very powerful, and the universe has its way of its self-preservation. So we are all subject to that. So, what is the relevancy of this in one person's life? I can't speak to that, but it does expand your horizon, and it's always important to expand your horizon. That's it.
Yeah, and it's a great final word. And to that, I would also like to add, I really enjoyed David Anderson's website because he has this whole, or like different philosophies even about time.
Yeah, the AndersonInstitute.com. You can go and look at his website. It was that website that I was able to break down and put into simple English using Qigong techniques, by the way. I was using the dark room. That enabled me to penetrate some of the things that I hadn't quite gotten in his personal lectures and even from reading the website. But the videos will make it even simpler for you and enable people to appreciate his website even more.
Okay. So I will definitely put your website and the videos and his website.
Yep, you can put those on there.
Okay.
AndersonInstitute.com, skybooks.usa.com, and TimeTravelEducationCenter.com.
Great. So, yeah, from my side, I would say I'm happy what we've talked about. Do you have any last words that you want to tell or give to people?
No, I pretty much said everything for now, and we'll follow this up. And thank you for having me on.
Yeah. All right. So I'll talk to you soon.
Okay. Thank you, Christoph.
Yeah. Thank you, Peter.